Coach, you mentioned before, in Georgia, obviously, I got to say it's probably one of, the top three or four states as far as producing Division I talent. I'm guessing you guys face some really, really talented defensive linemen, defensive ends. What are some things you try to do to maybe slow down those guys or game plan for some of those guys? Maybe you have some examples. I mean, do you prefer running at those guys? Do you prefer reading those guys? What are some ways you do that? And obviously, there's not just one. I'm sure you have many of them. But if you could share a couple, I think a lot of our listeners would be pretty interested in that.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially coming from the running the option stuff, like we've had a lot of success with the past few years. If you can block them, read them.
Okay.
And so we'll read the end, we'll run midline, read a three technique. We do power read as well. So we have some different things we can throw at like if it's a stud defensive end, we can present some different things to them, whether it be veer, whether it be power read. Maybe we base block him. Maybe after he's gotten we've run the veer at him a few times. Now he's kind of slowing down, or, now he's squeezing down. So, okay, so now maybe we try and reach to get outside. So we have some different things to take advantage of that. And we played a team last year that had in 2016 had a very, very successful nose guard, big time nose guard. And he a lot of times he was going to play head up the center. And the center we've had the past 2 years, I love him to death. He's one of my favorite players. But he was 5'10", if I'm being generous, and maybe 220 pounds. And so he's lined up against the Division I, nose guard. And so we made sure on every single play that we had, that nose guard was getting double teamed from the center and the guard. Every single play, there was no situation we had, no call in our game plan where that nose guard was going to get a one-on-one block. And so we'll do things like that, where we need to figure out this guy needs to get double teamed. And that's a little bit easier for the interior guys. If it's a shade or it's a three, it's a little bit easier to find schemes where you can double team those guys. But if it's a defensive end, you don't get a lot of double teams on those types of players. And if you do, it's probably coming from a tight end, which may not be your best blocker. So with the defensive ends, it's usually easier to maybe read those guys, or maybe even change it up on them. Sometimes, we'll give our guys a go ahead to, if we run in a pass set on a run block to get the guy, if he's real aggressive, pass set, get him running upfield, and boom, we run right underneath him. So we will do things like that just to kind of just give wrinkles, read, pass set on run plays, double teams, things of that sort, to change the looks up for those guys, because we don't want the defensive linemen getting comfortable. We always want them to have to think about, am I going to get reached? Am I going to get down blocked? Am I going to have to fight a combo block? Are they going to read me on this play, to slow them down? One of the best lessons I learned from our offensive coordinator, who, when I was first there, he did a really good job of, teaching me and getting me to understand, anybody can draw up a great play on the board. I mean, that's probably the easiest thing about being a coach. That's probably the thing we have the most fun with a lot of times, but anybody can get up there and draw a great play on the whiteboard. But being able to figure out what plays or what schemes will put your players in the best position to be successful, if the Jimmies are better than your Joes, that's what makes, a good coach. And like I said, I'm still learning a lot of this. I'm a young guy, and so that was one of the things that I think was really good for me. And so that's kind of one of the things I like to watch for when I'm watching on film is, first thing is there anybody on this front that we don't need to be single blocking, that we need to be comboing, or we need to be reading every single time. And I think, those guys who run up tempo and run zone, and that's all good. There's certainly pros to it, but I think you need to have some tags in that play that allow you to present different looks for the defense. And so, if you're going to be an inside zone team, I think you need to have, a way to run split zone, where you're kicking that defensive end, or maybe, traditional zone read where you read him, or even the, I can't remember I think it's the load, where the H-back comes from the opposite side, is looking like split zone. So that defensive end's preparing to take on that H-back, but he actually just, goes around to sort of steal off that backer, and it's just zone read. Or even, I've seen people, I think it was Oregon, they ran a lot of the outside zone midline, where they're running outside zone, but they're reading a three technique. And so I think those are all good things, but from an offensive line perspective, my first priority is figuring out, who can we block, who can we not block, and, what types of blocks or what types of schemes are going to give our guys the best success against their players.
My whole thought behind the personnel deal was, like you said, instead of 11 starters, now we got 15, 16. So now kids buy in a little more was the big thing. Also, it's so transient out here. Like I can't begin to explain to the level of how kids move in it. Kids change schools out here like you change pants.
Yeah.
Literally, there'll be kids that are at 3 different schools in a year. So what you have November, whatever, when the season ends, to what you have August 10th is completely different every year. I mean, you keep kids, yeah, but the makeup and it's just so different. So that's why we went to personnel groups, so we'd be prepared for these swings where one year we can line up and double tight and run power down your throat, and the next year we got to go no huddle spread because that's where our personnel strength is. I mean, we'll go from having 2 years ago we had 6 receivers that could have started. Last year we didn't have as many receivers who could have started, but we had 7 linemen that could have started. So it's just such drastic swings.
Right.
So what we did was, instead of calling the positions, X, Z, Y, all that stuff, was we called. I made them a position letters that would relate to the personnel group. So, for instance, our 4th receiver in, we were base 3 wide, tight end, running back. Our 4th receiver in, we called the J. We called him the J because there's a lot of sports teams that start with J. Jets, Jayhawks, Jags. That was the sole reason to call him the J. So every time the J came in, the personnel group started with J. So if we wanted our running back out, who was the T, it was Jet, J for T. If we wanted the S out, who was our kind of like a wing slot player, it was Jags, J for S. So the personnel groups were built solely based off and named, and the positions were named, so the personnel groups would be easy to remember. And the second tight end was R, because we could go Redskin, Raider, Raven. There was a lot of options. That's how we named the positions. And then we would change it. I wanted to get as flexible with the personnel groups as we could. So maybe in Jet, a kid was the running back. This year we had a kid who could have played tight end, wide out, and running back for us, in the same game. So one personnel group, he's a wide out, and the next personnel group, he's the second back, and the next personnel group, he's a tight end. And we just kind of built it like that. And the kids, it was super easy for the kids to remember. The first day or two, you'd hear them repeating it, but after that, they knew, like, hey, if it's Jayhawk, which was J for Y was the tight end, 1 4 wide, 1 back. They knew where to go. I wanted to make it as easy as possible for them, because 21 means nothing to them.
Right.
Yeah.
If they know they're this letter and their personnel group starts with it, that means they're in. And we also did that. We took that idea further with the formations. So we had, about 4 years ago, we had this kid move in, late in the summer, and he was one of our best players. And, one of the mistakes I made with him was I wanted to play him everywhere because he was good at everything.
Right.
And all I ended up doing was confuse him. But what I noticed was he was always confused on where to line up. Like ace, we called everything ace, tray, all that. And he never knew where to go on this. And I'm thinking, well, maybe he called it, he could have called it blue and green in his other high school. And then another kid could have called it, something completely different somewhere else. So to alleviate that confusion, we started calling formations numbers.
Yep.
So if it's 2 by 1, receiver-wise, we called it 21. you read right, you read left to right. Everyone can read, hopefully. And so the first number is the number of receivers on the left. The last number is the number of receivers on the right. And it was solely speaking to the wideouts. So all they had to listen to was that number, and then we tagged on the tight end and running back after that. So that way, because we get a lot of, there's no youth programs out, there's no feeder programs out here. So there's no middle school program for the high school. It's all basically the Wild West. So you're getting kids in 9th grade, 4 kids from one youth program, 5 kids from another. It's a collection of different youth programs. Well, they all have different terminology.
Sure.
So if I say, Ace and Trey to you guys, like, we know that, but these kids have never heard it. So why bang my head on the wall for 6 months and make things harder? So we just tried to make it as humanly possible for the kids to remember, and it allowed me to be a lot more flexible. I could get into as many formations as I wanted because it was no big deal to them, because the receivers knew they were listening for the number, the tight ends knew they were listening to the tight end tag, and the backs knew they were listening for the back tag. So we could get in. We had a game last season, I think we were in 15 different formations in the first 15 plays.